Hello everyone, Bodhi here. I just wanted to let everybody know that Beyond the Post is on a break. We sent out an episode last week saying that. One of the things that you may or may not know is that we're still making episodes for Patreon supporters. So if you want to know what goes on behind the scenes to make Beyond the Post and just kind of get a more intimate look into what Rob and I's process is, then you should go to beyondthepost.fm/Patreon. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to release a Patreon exclusive episode so that you can see what a behind the scenes episode looks like. Now, Rob and I have set up our Patreon to give everybody a 7-day free trial. And if you decide to stay on as a Patreon supporter, we have tiers as low as $3 a month. So do me a favor, go to beyondthepost.fm/Patreon and sign up for the free trial. And if you like what we're doing, you can stay on as a patron. If you don't like what we're doing, you can go ahead and cancel without any commitment on your end. If that's not something you're interested in, or you can't afford to do that right now, no worries. Please enjoy this complimentary Patreon episode, and Rob and I will catch you in season 3. We're recording now, but we're not recording anything for the show. We are recording for our patrons, but nothing specifically for the show itself. So we had homework. We had 4 show topics with guests, potential guests. So that was our goal for today, so that we can kind of plan out. I have another pitch for episodes that don't involve show topics just in general. Do you want to save that for the end, or do you want to do that now?
Let's go ahead and do that now.
Okay. So we've had some pretty amazing people on from different disciplines to this point. So I think what might be interesting to do is have a topic, and let's say the topic is algorithm. Have somebody that was a podcaster on, somebody who's a social media person, maybe somebody who's doing a newsletter or something like that, and we can have discussions from a different standpoint. It's kind of what you and I do just in general, but we're involving more people, which creates more work on the back end. But I think it overall creates a better conversation. And that's not to say we do that every time. Maybe we just do it one time, because trying to get everybody's schedules, as you know, is like very difficult. But I think we have enough people. I mean, we have enough people that we know, but we have enough people that we've had on that we could bring back some familiar faces and bring in some new faces and kind of help. I think that helps build community, but it also, because everybody has a different struggle, I think it gives a better picture of whatever topic we're talking about.
Okay. That actually sounds kind of interesting. So we're bringing a guest on that has expertise in an area, but we're not necessarily talking just about their expertise in the area. We're talking about what the topic is, AI, and maybe how they use AI in that area that they have expertise in. Am I following you?
Yeah, so it would be more like this. So let's say, and I'm just going to use people that we've had on. Let's say we're going to talk about algorithms. So we want to talk about algorithms. We have Sierra Maria on, or Sierra or Maria. We have Lamar on, because those two both, while they both create content, they do it in a different way. And then maybe we have somebody from maybe, like, I don't know, I'm not pitching Roger, but like Roger come on as well. And so that way we have a diversity of experiences that they can kind of play off of each other. And then one of us, you or myself, would be like the moderator of the discussion. So it's almost like a panel show.
Oh, okay. I saw that differently. I thought you were talking about we interview someone about a topic that they use in their content creation. Okay, I could see that.
And hopefully the hope is that we throw out a prompt, and then from there, we really don't have to prompt too many more times. If we get too far off subject, we'd have to reel it in. But from there, so and so could talk about their experience. Somebody else could chime in on either how they fixed something similar or how they've got a unique problem, and we just discuss the problem as if we're not trying to solve it, but just trying to educate each other on what we're doing.
Is this an episode or a series of episodes to where each show you've got 2-3 guests on?
No. So this would be so here would this is because we like to split it up into multiple episodes. This would be like we're going to have a panel show. We're going to talk about this subject, and then we're going to talk about this subject, and we're going to talk about, maybe it's only two subjects. I don't want it to go forever, but because we have two subjects, that could be technically two episodes. If one goes long, then we just cancel whatever the secondary subject was. If we're talking for an hour, I don't want to hold everybody for more than an hour to talk about the second discussion. So I say we would have like one main topic that we definitely want to hit, and if that topic runs out, we have a second topic that we can move to, and that becomes the second episode.
Okay. It's like a Beyond the Post roundtable.
Yeah, like a roundtable.
I like it. Scheduling becomes a little bit more difficult, but I like it.
I would imagine we would have to have one person on the panel. I'd like to have 4 total, that includes you and me. But we'd have one person that has a very flexible schedule that we invite, and one person with a rigid schedule that makes it. I mean, but if we get 2 people with flexible schedules, that's even better. But that makes it a little easier to pick a date versus having 2 people on that we know have tight schedules.
Okay. Let me give you a variation of this idea from a show that I just watched the other day. And I'm sorry, I can't tell you what the name of the show is. I can't tell you what the name of the people on the show are because it just came up next on YouTube when I was watching YouTube on the TV, and it's like, oh, this is interesting. And I watched it and I forgot to go and save it. I've seen both of the gentlemen that were talking enough that they'll come back up and it'll jog my memory. Oh, this is what this person's name is, and I can find it and tell you about it. But here's what it was. It's basically a podcast where there are 2 people who are videographers. They're professional videographers. And their topic was 5 things that you would get if you were just starting out today on your journey to being a professional videographer. And it was interesting because of each of them's list, probably 3 things were the same, but then 2 things were different. And each of the 2 things they were different, neither one of them actually said, in their list. So it was just interesting. And, so what they were doing was they were going through, well, you know what, if I was starting today, first thing I would do, and this is going to probably shock you as a videographer, is camera's not the first thing I'm thinking about. Microphone is the first thing I'm thinking about. And then he went through and he explained why the microphone was the most, was something that if I was starting today, this is what I would be doing. And he said, because it's like this, everyone who wants to be a videographer, who actually makes, this is something I think I want to do. At the very least, you have an iPhone in your pocket. You have an Android device in your pocket that you can take ridiculously good video with. And if you haven't decided to go spend, if you haven't actually done the creation of videos before and understand what that's like to know why you need a camera that might cost you $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, you're not doing yourself any service if you go spend that kind of money on a camera and then you determine after the fact, I don't really like doing this. So I say, don't get something that's expensive like a camera first. Get something that is not expensive like a microphone first that will make your video even, it's like, how do you say it? Psychologically, when you are listening to really good audio off a cell phone video, you think the video looks better, which is true. And it's just like, so that was his point 1. Then he goes on. So then the other guy goes and does his number 1. So they're going back and forth.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, it was a really compelling conversation to where they each named 5 things, and it took them probably 20 minutes to get through it with 2 people. So I'd imagine if you have 4 people, that same conversation would take you probably 40 minutes to an hour to get through, just because there's more people, there's going to be more crosstalk. But that's just a variation to where, you're picking a topic, and, and you're creating a list. Here's I would get this, I would get this. So like I said, it was my, each of them had microphone on their list. Each of them had lights on their list. Eventually, each of them had camera on their list. But then one was like a really good tripod. Another one was like, I can't even remember what the things they didn't have that unique were. But I was like, that was actually compelling content for people that I don't normally watch. But the thumbnail was really good, and it got me to actually go in and dive into that video.
Okay, I like that.
I'm just throwing that out as an idea. Basically putting some, just the type of shows that we could potentially do in that roundtable type capacity.
Okay.
I really liked that show, and I just haven't seen it come back up so that I could go bookmark it.
No, that's a good idea. So if we were to do this, we could say, we could do it one of 2 ways, and it would maybe depend on the people that we were going to have on, or it could depend on kind of what we're talking about in that season. We can have it topic based, or like maybe not, instead of 5 things, we do 3 things based, because that would make it so. Yeah, I like that idea. Some of the things that I wrote down were the first one that you said, what would you do? What would you do different if you were to start today? But what are 3 things you're struggling with, or 5 things? Of course, what are 3 pieces of equipment you're lusting after? What are, it just goes on and on and on. I think that's really good. That's a really good way, and that's a really good way to present it too.
Yeah, because lists
It's not
are so
open-ended.
compelling. They really, really are. I've been reading some stuff on creating good hooks, with your content, and lists are always right up there at the top, because people are psychologically designed to want to compare things. Keeps us alive when you compare. When you compare the height that you think you can jump from and the height that you don't think you can jump from, it's a good thing. It's self-preservation. So those type, so people are generally concerned, they generally, I would say that lists generally appeal to most people if the lists just aren't being overdone, which they can be. So that's part of it. And then also, I'm listing out things that are ultimately potentially going to help you in your journey to maybe get to where I am. So you're kind of getting 2 hooks there. This is what you should do to get where I am type hook. And of course, the hook of the list.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. And again,
it becomes compelling conversation, because everyone who might do the same thing doesn't necessarily have the same things on their list. So the crosstalk of, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even think tripod, but it makes sense. And it's like that's kind of how they were going. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, I'm not going to go back and modify my list. I think my list is good. But yes, if I was doing a list of 10 things, tripod might be 6 or 7. And I was like, yeah, it was actually just a very, very compelling episode about camera equipment, something that I'm interested in, but not so interested in that I go and follow a lot of people about that. It was just the thumbnail and the hook that they used to get me to watch that episode was very, very well done.
Yeah, no, I like that. And again, I love having open-ended conversations. Obviously, you and I have them all the time, but they also do tend to wander and take forever. Not it's not a judgment on our conversations, but I'm just saying in general, when you're just sitting down and chatting with somebody, which that could also be from an editing standpoint, that could be very hard to edit. So having a list, I'm falling more in love with this idea as I think about it. Having a list still allows us to have those topic based conversations, but also a definitive beginning and end point.
And also for video gives you B-roll. because if you're talking about this gimbal that you just got, it's in my list. I can go out and grab the website, for my list. Here's all the links to the, to the list. Here's video of it where you might use B-roll of the gimbal being used if that was something that was in my list, as compared to just being on a headshot of me when I'm talking. So I was looking at this not from just the aspect of I like camera equipment, but it was like I like how that episode went and how they were actually able to produce the content. And the more I get into it, I'm thinking about the actual production of content, a lot more than probably what I ever have before.
Yeah, no, I like this. I like it a lot. I think this is something we could work with. And like I said, from the back end side of this is fantastic.
So, Bodie, and for anyone who might be listening, I'm going to tell you about something that I did earlier. What is today? Today is Wednesday. So I did this last Friday, and I will be doing it again this Friday. I was on a podcast. I was invited to be interviewed by Scott Johnson, Scott Johnson from Frog Pants Network. And the name of this show is called it's called Podcast 360. It's produced by DCP Entertainment. And essentially what the show is that the very first episode is the host of the podcast interviewing someone that is also related to podcasting. So I think for season 2, it was Ariel Nissenblatt, who is she's kind of big in the podcasting industry. I believe she works for Descript. And she actually interviewed someone. And the way the interview went was that they start off with doing 2 truths and a lie. And you have to try to figure out what the lie is, of course. And then they go into 3 questions where they ask 3 questions and the guest has 1 minute to answer each question. And then at the end of that 3-question round, you pick one of those 3 topics that you want to dive deeper into. And then you just go and have a 10-minute conversation about it. Then the show ends. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The next week, Ariel Nissenblatt is not hosting the show. The person that she interviewed is now hosting the show. That's the 360 nature of it. Everything comes back to you. So, as I said, for me, last Friday, I was interviewed by Scott Johnson, who said he's like, we don't get to do shows more than once or twice a year. So he just wanted to have a conversation with me. So we actually had a show, did it. And now, because it's my turn to be the host, I will be interviewing someone this Friday when I'm going to be interviewing somebody we want to get on our show. So I'm not going to say his name right now, but a guy that I want to, that we want to get on our show for an interview. And I'll be interviewing this Friday. And I was like, man, there's so many ways to create content. And it literally is what, the person I was talking to from DCP Entertainment, Brittany, she was like, yeah, one of the things we've been trying to figure out is how can we get more people guest podcasting and, guest hosting and stuff like that. And this was a very, very simple way for them to do it. And like I said, each episode is like 20, maybe 25 minutes long, if that. And it was just, a completely novel way to do an interview. When I say novel, it's novel to me. Maybe someone else has done it. I've never seen it, but I just thought that was cool.
No, I mean, there's so many, like it gives you exposure, it gives Scott, and then whoever your next person is exposure to a wide variety of people. Is it out yet? Your episode?
My episode's not out yet. It is a season 2 episode, but it is not out yet. We just recorded it last week. I'd have to actually go look at see where they are with the episodes, but it should be out sometime in the next couple of weeks. If it's, if not even sooner than it, maybe next week or so.
I added this to my Overcast, but I'm going to add it to my Apple Podcasts too, because Overcast, I've got so many podcasts in there. Sometimes it's hard to find. All right. That is added. That's really cool. Who does the editing for that? Is it like Scott going to do it and then you're going to do the next one? Or?
No. So that, I'm not doing any editing at all. Her name is Brittany, is the person who contacted me. She did all the scheduling. I believe she's doing the editing. So she's like the producer, and there's another producer of the show as well. But DCP Entertainment is taking care of all of the editing, scheduling, and all that kind of stuff. Literally, all I had to do last week was show up with two truths and a lie and be interviewed by Scott. And all I have to do Friday is show up and have 3 questions ready for the person I'm going to interview and try to guess try to guess the thing that they're lying about. And then we'll have our conversation.
That's cool. That's cool. And I've never heard of DCP Entertainment before, but I'm looking at their website and they have a lot. They have a lot of shows.
Yeah, it's a fairly fairly decently sized network. The biggest name on there probably is the I guess you would call Teray a journalist, commentator.
Yeah,
but the Teray show.
Yeah, the Teray show. Trying to think if I recognize it. I've never listened to the Teray show, but I have heard the name.
So yeah, like he is like regularly on like MSNBC or CNN, networks like that, news, and then also DCP Entertainment. They cater to underrepresented communities. So when you go to DCP, you're going to see a lot of women, a lot of Black folks, a lot of Latinx folks, so on and so forth. Not only, I mean, there's white shows on there as well, but that's kind of what they, what they cater to.
Yeah, there's quite a bit. Like show, I'm trying to entrepreneur struggle, Freaknik, Inner Space, Lasagna Ganja. Let me say this, and then the podcast 360, The Politics of Food. I love that title. Yeah, that's cool. Picked Last in Gym Class. I'll have to take a better look at this. All right. So we have at least one show idea that we could put into the mix for season 3. Were you able to do all 4 of your recommendations?
Yes.
Okay. You know what? I should also say we have one paying patron member, which is Bill, but we also have David and Megatron just signed up on September 11th. So welcome to David, Megatron, and Bill.
Megatron might be from the Tech Gen. I think I have a Megatron over there as well.
Oh, yeah?
I'll tell you in a minute.
I'm not going to say his email out loud, but I'll post it.
Don't do that.
I'll post it in the chat.
I did at one point. I don't know that I do any longer, but there was definitely somebody, because I remember Terrence and I talking about it. It's like Megatron, like Calvin Johnson Megatron. It's like, no, I don't think it's that Megatron. It's somebody who also uses the name Megatron.
Yeah.
But like, that's such a common name. I don't know that this is the same person, but
yeah. I put the link, his email in the show notes to see if you recognize it. But yeah, it's cool. And if he followed you over from the Tech John, that's even better.
Yeah. So, on that point, Bodie, why would someone sign up to our Patreon? What is that going to get them, in your words?
Well, right now, Rob, to be honest with you, I don't know. I get some better conversation, like the whole conversation, especially when it's just you and I, because you and I have a separate part on the between the post episodes where we just have a regular conversation that isn't heard by the rest of the world. It's still around the topic, but it's a little bit looser of a show, and we kind of go into more things that we wouldn't necessarily go into in the main show. At some point in time, we do have ads turned on, so it's going to get you an ad-free experience. I don't know. I've never heard an ad on our show to this point, so I don't think we're quite jiving in that way. But it does take a little bit Acast to get you out there,
Mm-hmm.
especially a new podcast. So that's not something I'm terribly concerned about. But yeah, so it's going to get you in these conversations, the behind the scenes, because for anybody who doesn't know, at this point, in this first episode I'm going to release for free and everybody, but then after that it's only for paying members. But for anybody who hasn't listened to this show before, Rob and I plan an entire season out before we record it, and then we record it, and then an episode might be recorded 2 months before it's released. It just kind of depends on where it fits best in our schedule. So that's why, like, when somebody signs up to become a patron, we don't immediately recognize them, because that episode could be edited and ready to post months before we're actually going to release it. So it's a little bit harder for recognition purposes, but you're going to get the full, like, this is how we're planning out our episode. This is episode 1 of planning out season 3. So what do you think? What do you see that as?
Yeah. So I asked the question because it's a question that I'm thinking of, is like, why would somebody support us in this way? What ultimately are they going to get out of it? And I think about things that I say almost daily on something like Threads or LinkedIn. And it's like, is your content worth their time and attention? So just when, for us as podcasters, as folks who are creating stuff that goes on YouTube, point one is it even worth that person's time and attention? But we actually have a Patreon to where now it's like more than time and attention. There are, dollars and cents every month that you're paying to be part of this. So I think back to part of our conversation with, with Ashley, Ashley Lodge from Blue Helmet Media. Community is absolutely powerful when you build it properly. And I think you and I decided very, very early on, is like, we're not just talking into the ether. You and I are not just creating this podcast because it's more efficient to say it once and record it and have people get to it than to say it multiple times individually in our walks of life. It's more for us than just that. We really want to have that back and forth with the people who are listening to us. And then ultimately, I think that between the two of us, we've got an awful lot of content creation experience, and not that we know everything that is the right way to do things. I think that you and I collectively have done an awful lot of things wrong, and we take notes. So we can potentially help someone's process. We can help someone through a process and get to where they're trying to get to a little bit more quickly, just because they're looking at someone. Like in my case, I've been podcasting for 18 years. I think you've been doing it for what, over 10 now, right? Close to it.
Technically, I started in like 2010, but I had a very quick pod fade. I started several podcasts and pod faded very quick, like 3-4 episodes in.
So you got 14 years in the game, though. I mean, you've been doing it for a long, long, long time. So we get asked questions over and over and over again. Well, how do you do this? Or why did you do it this way? Or why didn't you do that? And not to say, like I said, not to say that you and I have the definitive answer, but we do have data. We've done things enough times to know, well, in our case, this worked. In our case, this didn't work. And we can then parlay that information to someone else who's trying to maybe skip some steps. I think Tony Robbins said this, but success leaves clues. So I think that you and I will both be considered successful podcasters. We both have podcasts that are probably in the, not just the top 1%, but top, probably, some fractions of a percent of, shows as far as, the number of people that listen and the reach that they have on the topics that we talk about. And so we clearly have done some things the right way. Once again, I think for me, it is longevity. I've done a lot of wrong things. It's just that over time, I figured out which things were wrong, took notes, and said, well, let's not do that again. Let's try it a different way. Oh, that worked. Let's dive into that. And I think that can ultimately help a lot of people who are where we were when we were first starting out, just helping people get from point A to point B more quickly, and then letting those folks talk amongst themselves.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, Rob, because we talked about this a little bit with Ashley. Is when you and Rod and Chris started SMR podcast, Allison popped in and your creator network expanded
Mm-hmm.
By a significant amount. And it's not just Allison, but there's other people that are involved in that. But Allison was probably the catalyst. Tom Merritt, and through Tom Merritt, Allison was the catalyst for me. I've had I went from being in my basement podcasting, not having anything to having anyone to bounce anything off of, to now I have people that I can pitch. I pitched you a podcast just before we started recording. I can talk to people about problems that I'm having. There are people and places that I can reach out to, and and then in return be supportive of my friends who are supportive of me. Right. The goal when you're creating is, I mentioned I started in 2010. Sierra and I, my oldest, who's if you don't know Sierra, look for the Send It Social episode. We did several podcasts together. We did a very inappropriately named podcast called Tap That App, where we review apps. We did news podcasts together. It was really, for me, because she was growing up, she was in high school, she was getting ready to leave the house. For me, it was a way to spend more time with her. I don't know what the motivation was for her. You'd have to ask her, but it was a way for me to be able to spend more time with my kid before she left. And those podcasts, like I said, they stopped. They didn't go very far. I tried to do a couple on my own. And I think we would have had more success, or I would have had more success, had I reached out to more people to ask questions of, like, hey, how do I improve this audio? How do I do this? How do I do that? And then be supportive to them as well. I think that would have made me more successful earlier. It was through sheer tenacity that my podcast that I have now, which is Kilowatt, has lasted as long as it has, because and by the way, it does make money. It does make a lot of money, but it does make money. But that not quitting part, which is, I just finished editing Ashley's episode, and I think I put this at the beginning of her part 2 episode, which is don't quit. Because if you quit, you're never going to succeed. If you think that success looks like 2 million downloads every month, readjust your thought about success, because that's really hard to get. You might get there, but it's really hard to get. So yeah, that's kind of, I wanted from the beginning, when Rob and I first sat down about this, he said, what do you see this show as? And I said, I want it to be a community that supports itself. And Rob was on board with that, and here we are. The goal is not for Rob. I mean, Rob and I will be supportive of whatever you're doing. That's because we're part of the community, but we don't want to be the whole community. We want the community to be sufficient and supporting one another, in addition to us supporting you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. There's value in talking to other people who are doing a thing similar to you are doing, because, like, I'll give you, I've been podcasting for 18 years. So through that time, my wife has heard an awful lot about podcasting, but she has no interest in it other than the person that she loves does it every day. Well, that's her interest. She doesn't listen to shows. And she doesn't even listen to my shows. What she'll do is she will go and add anything that I'm doing to her app, but she's not really a podcast listener. So, people, I've had people say, man, you can't even get your wife to watch, to watch you or listen to your show. And it's like, it's not about trying to get my wife to listen or watch, because for her, that's not what she does. She's not a podcast listener. She's
Yeah.
she's not into technology like I am. So I talk not almost, many of my shows are around technology. SMR, the Tech John, Daily Tech Headlines, Daily Tech News Show. They are all technology shows. My wife uses technology, but she's not thinking about it. She doesn't care that iOS 18 came out Monday. She doesn't care that the new iPhone is out. She doesn't use an iPhone. So when there's a phone that she wants out, that's when she'll care. Um, and so it's not like she's not supporting me. She absolutely supports me because she will go and she will download and she will wear a t-shirt that has, various logos and all that kind of stuff on it. She does all those kind of things, and she will listen to my episodes. And if there's an episode where I will say, hey, you might want to go listen to this, this might be of interest to you, she's going to go do that. But she's not a podcast listener, so it's not fair for me to expect her to just sit down and listen to everything that I do. So I've tried to find communities to where I can talk with people who like to geek out on the stuff that I like to geek out on, so that I'm not bugging my wife all the time. And I'll leave this for a tip. This is a place where I believe that a lot of new, and this isn't just podcast creators. This is just content creators in general. You are doing the people that love you most a disservice if you think they are to be the consumers of your content. If they are consumers of your content, then great. But don't just think because somebody loves you that they are the ideal consumer of your content, because you trying to get them to listen to everything is not fair to them. In the same way that if they, like my wife, Bodhi, you and I were, before we started recording, we were talking about reading and stuff like this. My wife is a member of not one, but two book clubs. Do you think I've ever stepped foot in one of those book clubs based off of the stuff I was telling you before we started this show? That would be painful for me to do that. But I've helped her go when she was hosting it, get everything set up. I've done those kind of things, been supportive that way. But no, I'm not going to just go read some book that I could care less about so I could talk about it, with my wife. That's just not a thing that she would ever ask me to do. So I don't know how we got on this tangent, but I will say this: when you are a content creator, it can be lonely, and that's one of the reasons why we're creating the conversation. But what you should not do is expect your loved ones, your significant others, to just consume everything that you create simply because you've created it. That is absolutely not fair to them, because they just may not rock with that content in the same way that you do, which is the reason you created it in the first place. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. I think the only podcast episode my wife has ever listened to that I was on was the first time it was just me on DTNS. And then I don't think she's listened to anything since. But my wife doesn't listen to podcasts. Like one time she came home from a work thing and somebody was speaking from outside the company. I got to be very careful because I can't divulge what my wife does. Mm-hmm. But somebody from outside of the company was speaking, and this person had a podcast, and it related to what my wife does. And she listened to his podcast for like 4 or 5 episodes. And a friend of mine was like, does that bother you that your wife said he would listen to your podcast, but she's listened to 4 podcasts of the other guys? And it's like, no, it doesn't, because my wife doesn't have any interest in electric vehicles. She doesn't even really like the one that we got. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It makes her car sick. It doesn't make a lot of sense for me to make my wife listen to an hour of EV content every single week when that's not the thing she's into.
Yep. So that's why communities like Beyond the Post exist, so that people who have a common thing that they're interested in our case, content creators who are trying to up level their content creation, that they're potentially trying to make money, trying to profit from their content creation. They want to talk to each other, they can do so in our community. And that's one of the reasons why we're building it. It also gives them the ability to do this. It gives them the ability to ask someone questions. Bodhi, I don't know about you, but I love to talk about this stuff. I absolutely love it. But a problem, and I started to realize this probably really during the pandemic, was that if everyone that I know that wants to talk about this stuff, that wants to, hey, can I just pick your brain for a second? Hey, can I get you a virtual lunch? Hey, if you say yes to all of that, you ultimately are going to drive yourself mad, because you just don't have the time to have all of those individual conversation. So one of the things when people ask me is like, hey, why did you start a podcast about X, Y, or Z? And it's like, because I was having individual conversations with people and it was inefficient. So I created a podcast so that I could answer the same question that I get over and over and over again one time in a podcast episode, give you all the incidentals and accidentals around that particular thing that we were talking about. And then when I get asked that question, it's like, hey, I don't have time to, for you to pick my brain specifically on it, but go listen to this episode where I may be able to answer your question. And what I've come to find is that I would say 7 times out of 10, that question probably gets answered. And, that other 30%, the person will come back and say, that was great. It makes a lot of sense. But, but what about this or what about that? And oftentimes I'll just go ahead because now we've had, we've struck up a conversation. I know that they've gone and they listened to something. There's a framework for where we're working around. And now they're asking something specific. And I can say, oh, here's another piece of content. Go listen to this. Or I might just be able to answer what would have been a 30-minute conversation the first time. Now it's just a 5-minute back and forth in a chat app or something like that. There's that. But then there's also, well, hey, if you really want to do more, and that generally where you move from, I will give you all the information that I can off the top of my head into a podcast episode or into a video. But if you've got specific questions, it's like, well, hey, I don't have time for you to pick my brain, but I do have open office hours in Patreon. So if you become a patron, if you become a member of the community, you know that once a week you can come in and you can just ask whatever question you want. And, we'll be there to answer those questions when those things are scheduled. So that's something that I've actually done. We haven't gotten to that point in our Patreon community yet, but it's definitely something that we want to get to when folks are asking us questions to the point to where, hey, let's hold office hours, let anybody come in and ask a question and we can answer them collectively for the group. But I've actually, been able to do that. And from that, Bodie, I've personally had consulting opportunities, come from it to where folks have said, okay, wait, you told me what to do. And then you showed me how it can be done. I don't want to do it. Can you just knock that out for me? And that allowed me to literally do things where I am now sitting in an office that we turned into a podcast studio with lights and all this kind of stuff behind me and sound dampening on the walls and all that kind of good stuff. That this is what I do every day now. It's like, podcasting was what I did for a hobby. Now it's what I do for a living.
Yeah. And that is my goal long term. 2 more years. 2 years and 9 months.
I know you were counting the days. Now I asked you, was that last week? I said, so dude, How long do you have? You told me to the hour.
I got it on my app. It's I have like 120 or 1,022 days is where it's at. And every time I'm up late at night and like last shift, we got 6 hours total in 48 hours. That 1,000 days plus days seems like forever. But yeah, that is the goal. And, it's not a bad goal for people to have. But we definitely want to be a part of that. So I think, well, go ahead. I think we're going to do the same thing.
No, I was just going to say, before we wrap things up, I want to...
we got to talk about pitches for the show. Pitch,
but I'm just talking about this part of what we're talking about right now, just extraneous stuff. I want to get your take on something. I actually put a post out on Threads the other day, and I'm just going to read it to you. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I believe many of the podcast platitudes about listeners not being important are becoming kind of ridiculous. That now there's more that I've written to that, but
are you talking about the amount?
I'm sorry,
listeners? Are you talking about the amount of listeners?
So there seems to be. Well, I can tell you where this stems back to. There was an interview. You're familiar with Rick Rubin from Def Jam. He did an interview earlier this year. And one of the things he said in the interview is that when I'm creating, I don't think about the listeners at all. I could care less. It's like what I create is not for them. It's for me. I'm paraphrasing significantly, but it's not for them. It's for me. And if they want to listen to it, then great. But if they don't, then great, because I wasn't creating it for them, in the first place. And I think what happened is that, and this happens often in social media and on the web, is that people will hear somebody famous say something and then completely misstrew and misunderstand what they're saying. So what I started to see come from that was podcasters who, and here's the thing about when you say stuff on the internet, you kind of are leaving receipts. You can see if you go back and look at somebody's straight, you can see the kind of questions they were asking 3-4 months ago as compared to the kind of stuff that they're saying today. So it was interesting to me is that there would be folks who are, well, how do I get more listeners? How do I get more viewers? How do I get more downloads? How do I get more likes? How do I get whatever the metric is that they're looking for? And then you see that more from, well, those things aren't important in the first place. I don't even care about listeners. I'm not creating my podcast for listeners. And so my response to this was that I think this is kind of ridiculous. Now, I will say this. I do understand that some people are creating content not because they're trying to monetize it, not be trying to grow an audience. It's an art form. It's a release for them. I get that. That's probably not my audience. Those are probably not the folks that I'm talking to most. But when I hear someone say, I'm going to create a podcast and I'm going to do all the things, all the work necessary to make that podcast great, but you don't even think about the listeners that are going to listen to your podcast and think about how they're going to perceive it and ultimately how you're going to deliver content to them to make that content worth their time and their attention. There's those words again. I think you're missing the point. Now, this is just an opinion. I'm not saying that I'm right or that everyone else is wrong that doesn't do it this way. But I just personally believe that if you are going to, if you're in the process of creating a show, you've got the idea for a show, you probably should be thinking about, well, who will listen to that show before you start creating the show? Because once you understand who who the listeners are, you're going to make some decisions that potentially will make things easier for you that you wouldn't necessarily have made if you weren't thinking about listeners in the first place. So like I said, I will concede the point that if you are coming completely from an artistic standpoint and you could care less whether anybody ever listens to your art or not, it was a personal release, then you're exempt. But if you ever care about somebody listening to your show, you probably should care about the people who listen to your show. And that was, kind of the point I was making. So I just wanted to get your take on that. You may have the same take, a different take. I want to get your take on how important are the listeners at the beginning of your podcasting journey or the beginning of your content creation journey as compared to your just, build it in, like I call it the Field of Dreams method. If you build it, he will come. That does not work in podcasting, in my opinion.
No. And, Rick Rubin is in a little bit different position. Like the Beastie, do you like the Beastie Boys?
I do.
Okay. So did you see the Beastie Boys documentary? It's on Apple TV. So I don't know if
I didn't see all of it. I saw clips that were like on YouTube.
Okay. So, Rick Rubin responsible for the Beastie Boys. Like, I think it might have been his first band that he represented. Run DMC, LL Cool J. I'm just reading these. Kesha, Adele, Lady Gaga, Danzig, Metallica, Slayer, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Rage Against the Machine, Weezer, Audio Slave, Linkin Park, System of the Down, Slipknot, Johnny Cash. This guy is, first of all, he's not writing the music. He's sweetening the music is what he's doing. He's really good at putting those connections, like Johnny Cash and Trent Reznor when Johnny Cash did Hurt. I don't know if you heard that. It's great, haunting, right before Johnny Cash died. So he's really good at that stuff. And he probably isn't thinking about that. He's thinking about, how do I make this song better? But I guarantee you, when these musicians are writing these songs, they know in the back of their head, this song worked. This song worked in the past. Maybe not in the case of the Beastie Boys or when they're brand new, right? But this song is going to, or could potentially be, a hit because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And maybe the song came from a good place, or maybe it came from a place of, this is going to make us money. That both happen in the music industry. So Rick Rubin is an artist, but he's not the artist. He's not making music. He's making music better. But he's also very insulated. If you look at him, you would you'd be a little scared if Rick Rubin walked up to you on the street to say hello, because he's a big guy with a big bushy beard, and he's kind of got dead
Mhm.
eyes. I don't want to bash on Rick Rubin, because I do respect him and I think he's really talented. For you and I and the rest of the normal people, we do have to care. I pay attention to what my audience says a lot. I do not always follow their recommendations or do what they want, and maybe they'll drop off. That's fine. But I pay attention to what my audience says. If my audience sends me 3 articles, we'll just say for the kilowatt. If my audience sends me 3 articles, I'll pick one of those 3 and I'll put that in the show notes, because they took the time to read them and be like, these are interesting. Here you go. And 2, it makes them feel, and they are not just feel, it makes them a part of the show. And I feel like I've gained a very loyal audience by doing that. I will
Mhm.
promote other people's podcasts on my show. I do it all the time. And even if they're not listeners, if I listen to something and I think it's good, I'll tell people to go listen to it. I'm not afraid of a little
Yeah.
timeshare.
And Bodie, where I think you are is even further into when I say care about your listeners than even what I'm saying. I'm literally talking about, you know what? I think I want to create a podcast. What do you want to create a podcast on? I want to create a podcast on X, Y, and Z. As soon as you tell me that you want to create a podcast on X, Y, and Z, the first thing I think about, well, who's going to listen to that? And that's the point that I'm making. It's like, if you know you want to create a podcast on X, Y, and Z, the next thought for me, like I said, this is
Who's
not for
your
everyone, but the
audience?
next thought for me is that, well, if I'm creating a podcast on X, Y, and Z, who is interested in X, Y, and Z enough that they would listen to my podcast that I'm creating? Because for me, I don't think that I view podcasting as a artistic release. I don't think I view it that way. I just like to talk a lot. I have a lot of opinions on things, and I like to put them out there. So it's that for me. But I am talking about X, Y, and Z because I want ultimately people to listen to me talk about X, Y, and Z, and then ultimately respond to me talking about X, Y, and Z. So in order for those things to happen, in my mind, I need to be thinking very specifically about who's interested in X, Y, and Z the way that I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
Because I'll give you an example. This is a true story. It is actually someone I'm related to, and they're still podcasting, and they wouldn't mind me saying this. But I had a family member say, "Hey, guess what? I started a podcast." And they were like, I was like, "Really? What's it about?" It's about this and that. You really have to listen to it to kind of figure it out. You should listen. And I was like, "Absolutely not." They're like, "Well, wait a minute. Why wouldn't you listen to my podcast?" It's like, because you couldn't tell me what your podcast was about. I want to know, what am I getting into? And this is a family member, so I was being a bit pedantic in doing this, but it's like, I want you to tell me what your show is about so that I can determine whether or not it's something that I'm interested in, because there is a significant age difference in between this person and I. I'm probably 15 years older than they are, and we're into different things. I am firmly implanted into Gen X. They are a millennial, and we don't think exactly alike. So I was like, so no, don't just have me go to your show and have to listen to it to figure out what your show is about. Let me know what your show is up front. And I promise you, when you do that, it'll be a lot easier to find users. And it's like, yeah, because I was asking folks about, like, we did this one episode, and if we were talking about like a shopping haul that she had done, and she had some people who listened. And then they had another episode where she was talking about she had to get breaks. Once again, the show is about her life. So I was like, are you infamous? Because I know you personally. Is like, are you infamous or are you famous? If you're not one of those two things, it's very difficult to get people to be interested in your life that is, from their point of view, mundane, because they have a mundane point of view life. They can just think about the stuff that they do during the day as compared to thinking about what you do, unless you're bringing something to it. You're bringing humor to it, or you've got this ridiculous ability to tell stories or something like that. But there's got to be something there for somebody to go find out why you did a shopping haul one day, and the extravaganza that you went through to get breaks the next. He's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And that's actually kind of what folks are saying. It's like, yeah, I cared about the shopping stuff. I could care less about your breaks. I don't even have a car. So my whole point on when I say that I think that you should absolutely understand who your listener is. Once again, I'm carving out the caveat that if you are a creator and you could care, if this is 100% hobby and you could care less about who's listening. I had people say you should create your content like nobody is watching you dance. And I understand that. But if you ever say, but I am interested in having people listen to me, I am interested in having people partake in the content that I'm creating, you, in my opinion, need to think about who those people are so that you can be more effective in positioning your content to be in front of them in the first place. That is the whole point that I'm making. Once again, it is not necessarily a right thing or a wrong thing. It's just a thing that I've seen work for me to the tunes of, of many millions of listeners over the course of the last 18 years.
Yeah. So you're 100% right. There is a place for diary type podcasts, but you should also consider, like you said, to be an audience of one, which is you. And there are people like Artie Lang is just, he's a comedian. If you don't know who he is extremely good at telling a story. Bert Kreischer, extremely good at telling a story. Like just on regular podcasts, he makes it feel like it's not a bit. It makes it feel like it's a whole story that they both do. And there are other people who are really good at that. I think those folks come by it naturally. It's a really hard skill to learn, telling a good story and keeping people engaged. And that's okay if you want to make a diary podcast. You're just not going to have a lot of listeners. If you are podcasting like no one's watching, you're doing this in a silo. And again, if you're not seeking feedback or being receptive to feedback, you're going to have a small audience. And if you want a small audience, it's okay. If you want to grow your show, you got to listen to what the folks want, and it's not always reasonable, but you at least have to listen and acknowledge their feedback.
Absolutely. So, man, that's the last tangent that I'll take you on. I know we had a couple of other things that we wanted to knock out in this recording.
Tell you what, because of work schedules and things like that, how about we put a cap on this episode and we'll hit the other stuff in a second episode, because my work schedule for the next couple of days we're planning on recording is kind of messed up. So,
okay,
you cool with that?
Let's do it.
All right. So, again, big thanks to Megatron and David and Bill. Thank you very much for being patrons, both paid and free. And Rob and I will catch you in a week.
Peace out.
All right, I'm going to leave that here. Oh, I don't want to leave the studio. There we go.